2 years ago, we had never heard of Ewing sarcoma. What we thought was a stress fracture from a sports injury turned out to be every parent's worst nightmare.
The result that came back was critical. They said that there was a huge tumor in her leg that had spread and that she had cancer and that it was Ewing sarcoma. The second sucker punch that came was when they laid out her treatment protocol. And we learned that it was over 40 years old.
Ifosfamide, 1987. Doxorubicin, otherwise known as the Red Devil, 1974. Vincristine, 1961. Etoposide, 1983. And cyclophosphamide, 1959.
The prognosis for Ewing sarcoma has been the same really since the advent of chemotherapy. For kids with one tumor, otherwise known as localized disease, the survival rate is 80%. For kids with metastatic disease, it's far worse at only 20%.
In August of 2020, our son Paul was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma shortly after his 6th birthday. Paul had been experiencing some intermittent leg pain and limping, so we took him to Children's Healthcare for an x-ray, and that revealed a tumor in his right leg. And at diagnosis, the cancer had already spread to his left femur, his spine, and significantly in his lungs. So we launched right into treatment at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and that included 14 rounds of inpatient chemotherapy, surgery to remove the tumor, which also required us to remove the majority of his femur bone and replace it with an internal prosthetic, and finally 22 rounds of radiation. In July 2021, Paul was declared no evidence of disease, and for that, we are so fortunate.
But the truth is, Paul's mobility in life is forever altered, and we're not out of the woods yet. What keeps us up at night is that the cancer comes back. And because there's been little to no progress in treatment protocols, a Ewing's relapse is generally considered incurable.
Of the entire federal budget for cancer research, only 4% is allocated for children, and there are close to 100 types of cancer specific to children. The other 96% goes toward fine-tuning treatments for adult cancers that in many cases already have a much higher cure rate and a less archaic treatment approach.
There's been so much advancement in the cancer industry, and adult treatment has progressed significantly. And I naively thought that also translated to pediatric cancer, but it absolutely has not.
The treatment is brutal. Most adults couldn't survive the pediatric protocol that these kids go through. And 95% of kids are going to have a significant health event by the time they're 40 years old. Heart damage, nerve damage, organ failures, and that's not from the cancer, but from the toxicity of the medicine that we're pouring into their bloodstream to treat it.
Because the chemotherapy destroyed not only Paul's cancer, but every healthy cell in his body, we have no idea what the long-term effects on his health are going to be. So couple that with the fact that there is no proven treatment for relapse, it's basically every parent's worst nightmare.
That's how it is for Ewing sarcoma patients. There is no protocol. There are limited clinical trials. It's terrifying.
In spite of all this, Little Warrior Foundation was founded on gumption and hope.
Ewing sarcoma is driven by a single gene that most oncologists theorize that if we could stop that gene, we could stop this disease dead in its tracks.
So Ewing sarcoma is specifically characterized by an abnormal joining of two genes that don't normally belong together. Most commonly, that's a gene called EWSR1 and FLY1.
The rate-limiting step is really a lack of funding.
What families and foundations allow the field to do, and folks like us, who are researching the cures do, is sort of take a fast-track, high-risk, high reward approach. And I cannot emphasize that enough.
Partnerships like we have developed with the Little Warrior Foundation allow us to run clinical trials that we otherwise would not be able to run.
The most important part of my job is to give families hope. We hope for less toxic and more targeted therapies that are discovered through research funded by foundations like the Little Warrior Foundation.
We're locking arms with the top research institutions across the country and pushing them to create better options for these kids. No parent should have to bury their child because of a cancer that is curable. We firmly believe that, and it's why we started the Little Warrior Foundation with the sole purpose of finding and funding a cure for Ewing sarcoma.
The answers are out there. We just need to find them and move faster.
Thank you for your support as we push toward a less toxic and a permanent cure. Not just for Lucy, but for all of the little warriors in this fight. The ones who have earned their wings and the ones who have yet to be diagnosed. Their battle is our battle now. Thank you for joining the fight. Swords up.